The December wind whistled through the bare branches of the ancient oak trees surrounding Anmer Hall, carrying with it the promise of snow and the magic that only Christmas could bring. Catherine stood at the large window of the Georgian country house, watching as the last golden rays of sunlight painted the Norfolk countryside in warm hues. Her breath created small clouds of mist on the cold glass as she pressed her palm against it, feeling both the chill of winter and the warmth of anticipation building in her chest. This year would be different. After months of public appearances, royal duties, and the constant scrutiny that came with her position, Catherine had made a decision that felt both revolutionary and necessary. For the first time since joining the royal family, Christmas would be truly private. No cameras, no formal protocols, no carefully orchestrated photo opportunities. Just her, William, and their children, creating memories in the sanctuary of their Norfolk home. She turned away from the window and walked through the spacious sitting room, her footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rug that had been a wedding gift from William's grandmother. The room felt different when it was just theirs, without the formal atmosphere that usually accompanied royal gatherings. Here, she could simply be Catherine, not the Duchess of Cambridge, not the future queen consort, just a mother preparing for Christmas with her family. The children's voices echoed from upstairs, a mixture of excitement and barely contained energy that had been building for weeks. George's deeper voice, now changing as he entered his teenage years, mixed with Charlotte's animated chatter and Louis's infectious laughter. They had arrived at Anmer Hall 3 days earlier, and already the house felt more alive than it had in months. Catherine made her way to the kitchen, where Mary, their longtime housekeeper, was preparing tea. The older woman looked up with a knowing smile, her eyes twinkling with the same anticipation that seemed to fill every corner of the house. "The children are beside themselves with excitement, Your Royal Highness," Mary said, arranging delicate china cups on a silver tray. "Prince Louis has been asking about Father Christmas every hour, and Princess Charlotte has been practicing her piano pieces for tomorrow's family concert." Catherine smiled, feeling her heart swell with a mixture of joy and relief. "Please, Mary, just Catherine this week. This Christmas is about family, nothing else." She picked up one of the warm cups, inhaling the comforting aroma of Earl Grey tea. "Have you heard from William? He should be back from London soon. His Royal Highness called about an hour ago. He's finished his meetings and should arrive before dinner." Mary's expression softened. "If I may say so, this is exactly what this family needs. Some time away from everything, just being together." Catherine nodded, feeling tears unexpectedly prick at her eyes. The past year had been challenging in ways she hadn't anticipated when she first married into the royal family. The constant balance between public duty and private life, the pressure to always appear perfect, the weight of knowing that every decision would be scrutinized and analyzed by the press and public. Sometimes she felt like she was losing herself in the role, forgetting the woman she had been before the titles and the tiaras. But, here, in this moment, surrounded by the warmth of their family home and the promise of a truly private Christmas, she felt like herself again. She felt like the woman who had fallen in love with a prince who was, above all else, just William to her. The sound of tires crunching on gravel drew her attention, and she looked out to see the familiar black Range Rover pulling up the circular drive. Her heart lifted as she saw William behind the wheel, his face already relaxing as he took in the sight of home. She watched as he sat for a moment in the car, probably savoring the transition from his official duties to this private sanctuary. "Daddy's home." Charlotte's voice rang out from upstairs, followed by the thundering of small feet on the wooden staircase. Within moments, all 3 children had burst through the front door, racing to greet their father with the kind of unbridled enthusiasm that only children could muster. Catherine followed more sedately, but her smile was no less bright as she watched William scoop Louis into his arms while George and Charlotte wrapped themselves around his waist. For a moment, he looked overwhelmed by their greeting, but then, his face broke into the genuine smile that she had fallen in love with all those years ago at university. "Did you bring surprises?" Louis demanded, his small hands patting down his father's coat pockets with the determination of a customs official. "Louis." Charlotte scolded, though her eyes were bright with curiosity. Daddy just got home. Give him a chance to breathe. William laughed, the sound rich and warm in the evening air. Actually, I might have stopped by Harrods on my way out of London, he said with mock seriousness. But, I'm not saying anything more than that. The children erupted into excited whispers and speculation, and Catherine felt her heart overflow with love for this man who could transform from the formal future king to a playful father in the space of a heartbeat. This was why she had fallen in love with him, this ability to be completely himself regardless of his position or the expectations placed upon him. As the family made their way inside, William caught her hand and squeezed it gently. How are you feeling about all this? He asked quietly, his blue eyes searching her face for any sign of uncertainty. Perfect, she answered honestly. Absolutely perfect. The evening unfolded with a naturalness that felt almost foreign after months of carefully choreographed public appearances. Dinner was served in the smaller dining room, the one with the fireplace that crackled warmly and cast dancing shadows on the walls. The children chattered about their plans for Christmas Day, their faces animated in the firelight as they described elaborate schemes for staying awake to catch Father Christmas. But, what if he doesn't come because there are no photographers to take pictures? George asked suddenly, his teenage practicality cutting through the younger children's excitement. I mean, everyone knows about Royal Christmas. What if Father Christmas expects cameras? Catherine and William exchanged a glance, both recognizing the underlying concern in their eldest son's question. Even at his age, George was already aware of the difference between their public and private lives, already understanding that their family's Christmas had always been a performance as much as a celebration. Father Christmas has been visiting children long before there were cameras, sweetheart, Catherine said gently. He's not interested in publicity. He only cares about whether you've been good, and whether you still believe in the magic of Christmas. Do you still believe, Mummy? Louis asked with the innocent directness that only a young child could manage. Catherine looked around the table at her family, at William's encouraging smile, at Charlotte's expectant face, at George's skeptical but hopeful expression, at Louis's wide, trusting eyes. She thought about the magic she had felt when she first fell in love with William, the wonder she had experienced when each of her children was born, the joy she felt in this moment of perfect domestic happiness. I believe in the magic of family, she said finally. I believe in the magic of love, and laughter, and being together. And I think that's the most important magic of all. After dinner, they gathered in the sitting room for what Charlotte had grandly announced as the first annual Anmer Hall Family Talent Show. George had initially protested that he was too old for such things, but Catherine noticed he was the first to volunteer when Charlotte asked who wanted to perform first. He played guitar, a skill he had been developing in secret, his fingers moving carefully over the strings as he performed a simplified version of Silent Night. His concentration was complete, his tongue poking slightly out of the corner of his mouth in the way it had when he was a small boy learning to tie his shoes. When he finished, the applause was genuine and enthusiastic, and Catherine saw him blush with pleasure despite his attempts to appear nonchalant. Charlotte followed with a piano performance that was both technically impressive and emotionally moving. She had chosen the Christmas song, and her small fingers moved confidently across the keys while she sang in a clear, sweet voice that reminded Catherine of her own mother. The girl had inherited both musical talent and a natural stage presence, performing with a confidence that was both admirable and slightly intimidating in someone so young. Louis's contribution was a dramatic retelling of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, complete with elaborate gestures and sound effects that had everyone in stitches. He threw himself into the performance with the complete commitment that only a 5-year-old could manage, adding his own creative embellishments to the familiar story and ending with a bow so deep he nearly toppled over. Your turn, Mummy and Daddy, Charlotte announced when Louis had finished soaking up his applause. Catherine felt a moment of panic. She and William hadn't prepared anything, had assumed they would be the audience for their children's performances. But, looking at their expectant faces, she realized that this evening wasn't about polished performances or meeting expectations. It was about being together, about sharing in the joy and silliness and love that made them a family. William stood and extended his hand to her with a theatrical bow. "May I have this dance, Your Royal Highness?" he asked in an exaggerated formal tone that made the children giggle. "I thought you'd never ask, Your Royal Highness," she replied in the same overly formal manner, taking his hand with an elaborate curtsy. They danced to no music except the rhythm of their own laughter and their children's delighted squeals. It was ridiculous and undignified and absolutely perfect. William spun her around the room, both of them laughing as they narrowly avoided furniture and tried to maintain some semblance of grace while their audience cheered and offered unhelpful advice. When they finally collapsed onto the sofa, breathless and giddy, Catherine realized that she hadn't felt this happy, this completely herself, in months. The woman who danced silly dances with her husband while her children laughed was the same woman who had existed before the royal duties and public expectations. She was still there, underneath all the protocol and formality, waiting for moments like this to remind everyone, including herself, who she really was. As the evening wound down and the children were finally persuaded to head to bed, Catherine found herself standing once again at the large window, looking out at the Norfolk countryside. But now the view was different. Snow had begun to fall, large, soft flakes that caught the light from the house and sparkled like diamonds against the darkness. William came to stand beside her, slipping his arm around her waist and pulling her close against his side. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the snow transform the familiar landscape into something magical and new. "Thank you," he said quietly, his breath warm against her ear. "For what?" "For this. For insisting that we needed time away from everything. For remembering what's really important." He tightened his arms around her. "Sometimes I forget, in the middle of all the duties and obligations, that the most important job I have is being their father. Being your husband." Catherine leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest against her back. "We both forget sometimes. That's why this is so important. We need to remember who we are when no one is watching, when there are no cameras or protocols or expectations. We need to remember the people we were when we fell in love, the parents we want to be." They stood together in the quiet warmth of their home, watching the snow fall and listening to the distant sounds of their children settling into sleep. Tomorrow would bring the magical chaos of Christmas morning, the joy of watching Louis discover that Father Christmas had indeed found their private celebration, the laughter of family traditions both old and newly created. But, tonight, in this perfect moment of peace and love and togetherness, Catherine felt like the luckiest woman in the world. She had a husband who loved her not for her title or her position, but for the woman she was underneath it all. She had children who filled her days with laughter and her heart with purpose. And she had this place, this sanctuary where they could simply be a family. The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in pristine white and promising a perfect Christmas morning. Inside Anmer Hall, surrounded by love and warmth and the quiet contentment that came from being exactly where she belonged, Catherine smiled and allowed herself to believe in magic once again. Catherine woke to the sound of whispered voices and muffled footsteps in the hallway outside her bedroom. The pale winter light filtering through the curtains told her it was still early, but the barely contained excitement emanating from beyond the door suggested that Christmas morning had officially begun, regardless of the hour. She turned to find William already awake, his eyes bright with amusement as he listened to what was clearly a failed attempt at stealth by their youngest children. Louis's whisper was loud enough to wake half of Norfolk, and Charlotte's attempts to shush him were equally audible. "Should we put them out of their misery?" William asked softly, his voice still rough with sleep. Catherine smiled, stretching luxuriously under the warm covers. For the first time in months, she had slept deeply and peacefully, without the weight of tomorrow's obligations pressing on her mind. Here, in their private sanctuary, tomorrow was just another day with her family, not a carefully orchestrated series of public appearances and royal duties. 5 more minutes, she murmured, savoring the rare luxury of waking slowly, of having nowhere urgent to be, no schedule to maintain. Let them build up the anticipation a little more. The whispering outside grew more animated, and she could hear George's deeper voice joining the conversation. At 14, he was officially too old to be excited about Christmas morning, but Catherine suspected he was just as eager as his younger siblings, even if he would never admit it. William chuckled softly and pulled her closer, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I love seeing you like this," he said quietly. "Like what?" "Relaxed. Happy. Just you." His fingers traced gentle patterns on her arm. "Sometimes I feel like we've forgotten how to be ourselves, how to be a family without an audience." Catherine understood exactly what he meant. Over the years, their family life had become increasingly public, every moment scrutinized and analyzed. Even their most private traditions had been shared with the world, photographed and reported on until they began to feel more like performances than genuine celebrations. But, here, in this moment, with snow still falling gently outside and their children whispering excitedly in the hallway, she felt like they had reclaimed something precious. They had found their way back to the simple joy of being together, of creating memories that belonged only to them. The whispers outside had grown to a crescendo, and Catherine could hear Louis's patience finally reaching its breaking point. "But I want to see if Father Christmas came," he announced in what he probably thought was a whisper but was actually loud enough to wake everyone in the house. "Now?" William asked with a grin. "Now," Catherine agreed, sitting up and reaching for her dressing gown. They opened the bedroom door to find all three children clustered in the hallway, still in their pajamas but clearly ready for action. Louis was practically vibrating with excitement, his dark hair sticking up at odd angles and his eyes wide with anticipation. Charlotte was trying to maintain some dignity despite her obvious eagerness, while George was attempting to look nonchalant even though Catherine could see the excitement in his eyes. "Well," Catherine said with mock seriousness, "I suppose we should go downstairs and see if Father Christmas managed to find us here at Anmer Hall." Louis grabbed her hand and began pulling her toward the staircase with the determination of a very small person on a very important mission. "He found us, Mummy." "I know he did. I heard the reindeer on the roof last night." Charlotte rolled her eyes with the superiority of a 9-year-old. "That was probably just the wind in the trees, Louis." "It was reindeer," Louis insisted with the unwavering conviction that only a 5-year-old could possess. "I know the difference between wind and reindeer." As they made their way downstairs as a family, Catherine felt a surge of pure happiness. This was exactly what Christmas morning should be like, she thought. Messy hair and pajamas, excited children and patient parents, the kind of anticipation that had nothing to do with expensive gifts and everything to do with the magic of believing in something wonderful. The sitting room had been transformed overnight. Where they had left a neat, tidy space with a beautifully decorated tree, they now found evidence of a mysterious midnight visitor. Stockings that had been empty the night before now bulged with treats and small gifts. Presents that definitely hadn't been there before breakfast yesterday now sat beneath the tree, wrapped in colorful paper and tied with elaborate bows. But what captured everyone's attention immediately was the plate of cookies they had left for Father Christmas. It now sat empty except for crumbs, and the glass of milk had been drained. A half-eaten carrot lay on the plate next to it, evidence that Rudolph had also enjoyed his treat. "I told you he would come," Louis shouted triumphantly, racing toward his stocking and examining it with the intensity of a detective investigating a crime scene. Even George couldn't hide his smile as he approached the tree more sedately, his teenage coolness cracking slightly at the sight of packages with his name written in the distinctive handwriting that Father Christmas always seemed to use. Catherine and William settled onto the sofa together, still in their dressing gowns, and watched as their children dove into the magic of Christmas morning. This was different from the formal Christmas celebrations they usually shared with the extended royal family, where everything was orchestrated and photographed. This was organic and chaotic and absolutely perfect. Louis attacked his stocking with the enthusiasm of a very small tornado, pulling out one treasure after another and announcing each discovery to the room at large. "Look, Mummy. Father Christmas brought me chocolate coins. And a new car for my collection." And, look at this whistle. Catherine winced slightly at the whistle, making a mental note to have a conversation with Santa about the wisdom of giving noise-making toys to 5-year-olds. But, seeing Louis's joy made it impossible to be anything but grateful. Charlotte approached her gifts with more organization, carefully examining each package and arranging them by size before beginning to unwrap them with neat, precise movements. She had always been methodical in her approach to everything, a trait that sometimes made Catherine wonder if her daughter was actually much older than her years. George tried to maintain his teenage dignity, but Catherine could see him struggling not to tear into his presents with the same enthusiasm as his younger siblings. Finally, his excitement won out over his attempt at coolness, and he began unwrapping gifts with barely restrained enthusiasm. As the unwrapping continued, the room filled with the sounds of delight and discovery. Charlotte squealed with joy over a new art set that would allow her to explore her passion for painting. George's attempt at nonchalance crumbled completely when he unwrapped the guitar pedal he had been wanting but hadn't quite worked up the courage to ask for directly. But it was Louis's reaction to his main gift that brought tears to Catherine's eyes. Hidden behind the tree had been a large package that revealed itself to be a wooden castle, complete with knights and horses and a working drawbridge. Louis stared at it in complete silence for a long moment, as if he couldn't quite believe it was real. "Is it really mine?" he asked quietly, his usual exuberance replaced by something approaching awe. "It's really yours," William assured him, and Louis threw himself into his father's arms with such force that they both nearly toppled over. As the morning progressed, Catherine found herself marveling at how different this Christmas felt from the formal celebrations they usually shared with the rest of the royal family. There, everything was traditional and ceremonial, beautiful but somehow distant from the simple joy of children discovering their gifts. Here, in their pajamas and dressing gowns, surrounded by wrapping paper and the warm glow of the fireplace, she felt like they had captured something that had been missing from their family celebrations for years. They were creating memories that belonged entirely to them, moments that would never be shared with the world or analyzed by royal watchers. After the presents had been unwrapped and the children had spent some time exploring their new treasures, Catherine suggested they all get dressed and take a walk in the snow before breakfast. The suggestion was met with enthusiastic agreement, particularly from Louis, who was eager to test his new Wellington boots in the fresh snow that had fallen overnight. An hour later, the family emerged from Anmer Hall bundled in warm coats, scarves, and boots, ready to explore their transformed landscape. The snow had continued falling throughout the night, leaving everything covered in a pristine blanket of white that sparkled like diamonds in the pale winter sunlight. The children immediately began making snow angels and attempting to build a snowman, their laughter echoing across the quiet countryside. Catherine and William walked more sedately, hand in hand, enjoying the peaceful beauty of the morning and the simple pleasure of watching their children at play. "I can't remember the last time I felt this relaxed," Catherine said softly, her breath creating small clouds in the cold air. "Neither can I," William replied, squeezing her hand gently. "Sometimes I think we've forgotten how to just be a family, without all the protocols and expectations." They paused to watch as George helped Louis roll a large snowball for the base of their snowman, his teenage coolness completely forgotten in the face of his little brother's enthusiasm. Charlotte was nearby, carefully crafting what appeared to be a snow sculpture rather than a traditional snowman, her artistic tendencies evident even in her winter play. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" Catherine asked suddenly. "Keeping this Christmas private, I mean. People expect to see the royal family at Christmas. They've always shared our celebrations." William considered her question seriously before answering. "I think," he said finally, "that our children deserve to have some memories that belong only to them. They deserve to experience the magic of Christmas without cameras and without knowing that every moment is being recorded for public consumption." Catherine nodded, understanding the wisdom in his words. Their children were growing up in an extraordinary situation, where their every move was watched and analyzed. But childhood was precious and brief, and they deserved to have some experiences that were purely their own. Besides, William continued with a smile, "Look at them. When was the last time you saw them this happy, this carefree? Catherine looked at her children, all three of them completely absorbed in their snow activities, their faces bright with joy and excitement. George was showing Louis how to pack snow properly, his patience and gentleness reminding her of the man he was becoming. Charlotte had abandoned her sculpture to join a snowball fight, her usual composure replaced by delighted squeals and laughter. Louis was simply radiating happiness, his entire being focused on the joy of the moment. "You're right," she said softly. "This is exactly what they needed. What we all needed." As they continued their walk, Catherine found herself thinking about the early days of her relationship with William, when they could be just Catherine and William, not the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. They had been able to create their own traditions then, to discover what kind of couple they wanted to be without the weight of royal expectations. Now, for the first time in years, they were rediscovering what kind of family they wanted to be. They were remembering that beneath the titles and the duties, they were still the same people who had fallen in love at university, who had dreamed of building a life together. When they finally returned to the house, cheeks pink from the cold and spirits high from their snowy adventure, Mary had breakfast waiting for them. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread, bacon, and the special Christmas morning pancakes that had become a tradition in their family. As they gathered around the kitchen table, still in their winter coats and with melting snow in their hair, Catherine felt a profound sense of contentment. This was what Christmas was supposed to feel like, she realized. Not a performance or an obligation, but a celebration of family and love and the simple joy of being together. The children chattered excitedly about their morning's adventures while they ate, their voices overlapping as they recounted the highlights of their snow play. George described the engineering challenges of building the perfect snowman, while Charlotte discussed the artistic merits of various snow sculpture techniques. Louis simply ate his pancakes with enthusiasm, occasionally interjecting with observations about how good everything tasted and how this was the best Christmas ever. As Catherine listened to her children's happy voices and felt William's hand warm in hers, she realized that this private Christmas had already given them something more valuable than any public celebration could offer. It had given them back to themselves, reminded them of who they were when the world wasn't watching. And the day was only just beginning. The afternoon brought a gentle rhythm that Catherine had almost forgotten was possible during the Christmas season. After the excitement of the morning's gift opening and snow adventures, the family had settled into a peaceful lull that felt both luxurious and natural. There was no schedule to maintain, no appointments to keep, no photographers waiting to capture their every move. Catherine found herself in the kitchen with Charlotte, teaching her daughter how to make the traditional Christmas pudding that had been passed down through her own family for generations. It was a recipe her mother had taught her, and her grandmother before that, a link to their heritage that felt especially meaningful in this private setting. "Why do we put coins in the pudding, Mummy?" Charlotte asked, carefully measuring out the dried fruit with the precision that characterized everything she did. "It's for luck," Catherine explained, watching as her daughter's small hands worked with surprising skill. "Whoever finds the coin in their slice will have good fortune in the coming year. It's an old tradition, one that connects us to all the families who came before us." Charlotte nodded seriously, absorbing this information with the gravity she brought to all new knowledge. "Will we do this every year? Even when we're back to regular Christmas?" The question caught Catherine off guard, and she paused in her stirring of the pudding mixture. Regular Christmas, as Charlotte put it, meant the formal celebrations with the extended royal family, the public appearances, the carefully orchestrated traditions that had become as much about duty as about joy. "I hope so," Catherine said honestly. "I hope we can find a way to keep some of these quiet traditions, even when we're back to our other obligations." From the sitting room came the sound of William playing guitar with George, their voices harmonizing on a Christmas carol that wasn't quite in tune but was filled with so much love and laughter that it brought tears to Catherine's eyes. This was what she wanted to preserve, this sense of family togetherness that existed without any need for external validation or approval. "Mummy," Charlotte said suddenly, her voice quiet and thoughtful. "Are you sad that Grandmama and Grandpapa aren't here? And Uncle Harry and the others?" Catherine set down her wooden spoon and turned to give her daughter her full attention. It was a perceptive question, one that touched on the complex dynamics of their extended family and the sometimes difficult balance between personal desires and royal obligations. "I love them very much," Catherine said carefully, "and I miss them. But, sometimes, families need different kinds of time together. Sometimes we need the big celebrations with everyone, and sometimes we need quiet time with just us. Both kinds are important." Charlotte seemed to accept this explanation, but Catherine could see the wheels turning in her young mind. At 9 years old, Charlotte was already aware of the complexities of their family situation, the way that their personal lives were intertwined with their public roles in ways that most families never had to navigate. As they continued working on the pudding, Catherine found herself thinking about the choices they had made this Christmas, and the reactions those choices might provoke. She knew there would be questions about their absence from the traditional royal Christmas celebrations, speculation about what their private celebration might mean for their relationship with the rest of the family. But, looking at Charlotte's concentrated face as she carefully folded ingredients into the mixture, listening to the sounds of her husband and son making music together in the next room, Catherine felt certain that they had made the right choice. Their children needed this, needed to know that they were more than just their public roles, that their family was strong and loving and real even when no one was watching. The kitchen door swung open and Louis bounded in, his face still flushed from playing outside with the snowman they had built earlier. His excitement was infectious, filling the warm kitchen with an energy that made both Catherine and Charlotte smile. "Mummy! Charlotte! Come see! Daddy and George taught the snowman to play guitar," he announced with the kind of absolute conviction that only a 5-year-old could muster. Catherine and Charlotte exchanged amused glances. "A musical snowman?" Catherine asked with mock seriousness. "That does sound like something we should see." They followed Louis outside, where they discovered that William and George had indeed positioned George's acoustic guitar against their snowman in a way that made it appear as though the snowy figure was strumming along to their impromptu concert. The sight was so absurd and wonderful that Catherine burst out laughing, the sound carrying across the quiet countryside. "He's very talented," William said solemnly, trying to keep a straight face. "We're thinking of starting a band. The Snowman Serenaders, perhaps? Or Frosty and the Freezing Notes," George suggested, and even he couldn't maintain his teenage composure as he said it, dissolving into laughter along with the rest of the family. They spent the next hour in the garden, taking turns posing with their musical snowman and creating increasingly elaborate backstories for his imaginary career as a winter troubadour. It was silly and spontaneous and exactly the kind of memory that Catherine wanted her children to have of this special Christmas. As the afternoon light began to fade, they moved back inside to prepare for what Charlotte had declared would be their fancy Christmas dinner. Despite the informal nature of their celebration, Catherine had wanted to maintain some of the traditional elements that made Christmas feel special and meaningful. The dining room at Anmer Hall was transformed for the occasion, the table set with the finest china and crystal, candles flickering warmly in silver candelabras, and winter roses from the greenhouse arranged in elegant centerpieces. But, unlike the formal dinners of their public life, this table was set for family, not ceremony. William had taken charge of the turkey, a task he approached with the same methodical precision he brought to his royal duties. Catherine watched him through the kitchen window as he checked the bird's progress, his concentration complete and endearing. She loved seeing him in these domestic moments, when he was simply a husband and father focused on taking care of his family. "Daddy takes cooking very seriously," Charlotte observed, following her mother's gaze. "He wants everything to be perfect for us," Catherine replied. "That's what daddies do when they love their families very much." As evening approached and the family gathered around the dinner table, Catherine felt a profound sense of gratitude for this day, for this choice they had made to step away from the public eye and simply be together. The candlelight cast a warm glow over their faces, and the conversation flowed naturally from topic to topic, no one rushing to finish, no one thinking about what came next. George told them about a book he had been reading, his enthusiasm for the story evident in his animated description of the plot. Charlotte shared her plans for a painting she wanted to create, inspired by the snow-covered landscape outside their windows. Louis regaled them with elaborate stories about the adventures of their musical snowman, his imagination creating increasingly fantastic scenarios that had everyone laughing. But, it was during a quiet moment, as they were waiting for Mary to bring in the Christmas pudding, that the most meaningful conversation of the day occurred. Louis, who had been unusually thoughtful for the past few minutes, suddenly looked around the table with a serious expression. "Mummy, Daddy," he said in the careful voice he used when he had something important to say. "Is this what normal families do for Christmas?" The question hung in the air for a moment, heavy with implications that Catherine wasn't sure her youngest child fully understood. William reached across the table and took her hand, a gesture of support that she appreciated more than she could express. "What do you think normal families do, sweetheart?" Catherine asked gently. Louis considered this seriously. "Well, Emma at school said her family stays in their pajamas all morning and eats too much chocolate and watches Christmas films. And Tom said his family has big fights and then makes up and hugs a lot. And Sophie said her mummy cries during the Christmas songs because they make her happy sad." Catherine felt her throat tighten with emotion. Through the innocent observations of a 5-year-old, she was glimpsing what their children understood about the difference between their public life and the private family life that most children took for granted. "I think," she said carefully, "that every family finds their own way to celebrate Christmas. Some families have big parties with lots of people, some families have quiet days with just a few people. Some families have traditions that go back many years, and some families make up new traditions every year." "But, do we have traditions?" Charlotte asked. "I mean, our own traditions, not the ones we do because we have to?" Catherine looked around the table at her family, at William's encouraging smile, at George's thoughtful expression, at Charlotte's earnest face, at Louis's wide, trusting eyes. She realized that they were creating traditions in this very moment, that this conversation itself would become part of their family's story. "We do now," she said softly. "This Christmas, right here, right now, this is becoming our tradition. The musical snowman, the Christmas pudding we made together, Daddy's serious approach to cooking the turkey, Louis's stories about Father Christmas and the reindeer, Charlotte's plans for her painting, George's guitar playing. All of it." William squeezed her hand gently. "Your mother's right. This is what makes us a family, not the formal dinners or the public appearances. This, right here, is who we really are." Mary appeared at that moment with the Christmas pudding, its brandy aflame and creating a spectacular blue fire that had Louis gasping with delight. As they watched the flames dance around the traditional pudding, Catherine felt like the fire was illuminating something important about their family, about the choices they had made and the love that bound them together. When they finally cut into the pudding, it was George who found the coin, his surprise and pleasure evident despite his attempts to maintain his teenage dignity. But the real treasure, Catherine realized, wasn't the coin that promised good luck for the coming year. The real treasure was this moment, this day, this rediscovery of what it meant to be a family. As they finished their dinner and began to clear the table together, each family member carrying dishes to the kitchen and working together with the easy cooperation that came from genuine affection, Catherine felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with duty or obligation or public approval. They had given their children something precious today, something that no amount of formal protocol or royal tradition could provide. They had given them the gift of knowing that their family was real, that their love for each other existed independent of their public roles, that they could create their own traditions and their own happiness. Later, as they settled in the sitting room for what Charlotte had dubbed the evening program, Catherine realized that this day had changed something fundamental in their family dynamic. They had proven to themselves and to their children that they could choose their own path, at least sometimes, that they didn't have to let their public roles completely define their private lives. The evening program turned out to be a delightful mixture of Christmas carols, more stories from Louis about the musical snowman's adventures, and Charlotte's piano recital. George contributed by playing guitar accompaniment to some of the songs, and even William and Catherine found themselves singing along with more enthusiasm than skill. As the day drew to a close and the children began to show signs of the happy exhaustion that comes from a perfect day, Catherine looked around at her family and felt a profound sense of peace. They had created something beautiful together, something that belonged entirely to them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Eventually they would return to their public duties and royal obligations. But they would carry this day with them, this proof that underneath all the protocol and formality, they were still the family that had fallen in love with each other, still the parents who wanted nothing more than to give their children a childhood filled with love and laughter and magical memories. The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing their private world in pristine white and promising that the magic of this Christmas would linger for just a little while longer. Boxing Day arrived with a stillness that felt almost sacred after the joyful chaos of Christmas Day. Catherine woke to find the world outside transformed once again, the overnight snowfall having added several more inches to the already impressive blanket covering the Norfolk countryside. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional creak of tree branches heavy with snow and the distant call of birds brave enough to venture out in search of food. She lay in bed for a few precious moments, savoring the unusual luxury of having nowhere to be, no schedule to maintain, no carefully timed public appearances to prepare for. Beside her, William was still sleeping deeply, his face peaceful in the gray morning light. The stress lines that had become increasingly visible over the past year seemed to have softened during their days at Anmer Hall, as if the simple act of being a private family had reminded his body how to truly relax. The house was still quiet, suggesting that their children were also enjoying the rare opportunity to sleep in without the pressure of royal duties or school schedules. Catherine allowed herself to simply exist in this moment, to appreciate the simple pleasure of being warm and safe and surrounded by the people she loved most in the world. Eventually, the smell of coffee and fresh bread drew her from bed and downstairs to the kitchen, where she found Mary already busy preparing breakfast. The older woman looked up with a knowing smile, her eyes twinkling with the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed something special unfold. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," Mary said warmly, though Catherine noticed she had lowered her voice to match the peaceful atmosphere of the house. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in months," Catherine admitted, accepting the cup of coffee that Mary offered with grateful hands. "And, please, Mary, just Catherine this week. We're trying to remember what it feels like to be a normal family." Mary's expression softened with understanding. "If I may say so, yesterday was exactly what this family needed. I haven't seen the children so relaxed and happy in a very long time. And you and His Royal Highness, well, you looked like yourselves again, if you don't mind my saying so." Catherine did understand what Mary meant. Over the years, the constant demands of their public roles had created a kind of armor around their family life, a formal distance even in their most private moments. But yesterday had stripped that away, leaving them vulnerable and real and gloriously themselves. "Do you have children of your own, Mary?" Catherine asked, realizing that despite the woman's years of service to their family, she had never asked about her personal life. "3 grown children and 5 grandchildren," Mary replied with obvious pride. "And I've learned over the years that the most important gift you can give children is the certainty that they are loved for who they are, not what they accomplish or how well they perform their roles." The wisdom in Mary's words struck Catherine deeply. It articulated something she had been feeling but hadn't been able to express clearly. Yesterday had given their children exactly that gift, the assurance that their parents' love was unconditional and unrelated to their royal status or public behavior. William appeared in the doorway at that moment, his hair tousled from sleep and his feet bare despite the cold December morning. He looked younger than he had in months, she realized, as if the weight of his future responsibilities had been temporarily lifted from his shoulders. "Good morning, ladies," he said with a boyish grin that reminded Catherine powerfully of the young man she had fallen in love with at university. "I don't suppose there's any of that excellent coffee left?" As Mary bustled about preparing William's coffee, Catherine moved to stand beside him at the window overlooking the snow-covered gardens. The view was breathtaking in its pristine beauty, but, more than that, it represented something precious to both of them. This was their sanctuary, the place where they could be themselves without judgment or scrutiny. "What are you thinking about?" William asked softly, slipping his arm around her waist and pulling her close. "Yesterday," Catherine replied honestly. "How different it felt from every other Christmas we've had since we were married. How the children seemed more like themselves, more relaxed and natural." William nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that too. About how we can preserve some of what we found yesterday when we go back to our regular responsibilities." It was the question that had been lurking at the edges of Catherine's consciousness since she had woken. How could they maintain this sense of family authenticity when they returned to a life where every moment was scheduled, every appearance choreographed, every tradition performed for public consumption? The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced the arrival of their children, and soon the kitchen was filled with the comfortable chaos of family breakfast. Louis appeared first, still in his Christmas pajamas and carrying the wooden knight that had become his constant companion since opening his castle yesterday. Charlotte followed, already dressed and, with her hair neatly braided, her organized nature asserting itself even on holiday mornings. George arrived last, moving with the unhurried pace of a teenager who had discovered the joy of sleeping late. "What are we doing today?" Louis asked around a mouthful of toast, his question directed to no one in particular but, clearly expecting a comprehensive answer. "Whatever we want," Charlotte said with satisfaction. "No schedule, no appointments, no photographers. We can do anything." "Anything?" George asked with the skeptical tone that had become his default mode of communication lately. "We could stay in our pajamas all day. We could have ice cream for lunch. We could build snow forts in the garden. All of those things, if that's what would make you happy," William replied, and Catherine could see George struggling to accept that such freedom was actually possible. They had raised their children within the constraints of royal protocol for so long that the idea of a completely unstructured day seemed almost foreign to them. But, as the morning progressed, Catherine watched with delight as each of her children began to relax into the possibilities that such freedom offered. Louis spent the morning creating elaborate adventures for his nights in the castle, his imagination unconstrained by any need to be quiet or well-behaved for public appearances. Charlotte set up an art station in the morning room, where the light was perfect for painting, and began working on a watercolor landscape inspired by the snowy view outside. George surprised everyone by suggesting they all go sledding, revealing that he had spotted some old sleds in the storage shed behind the house. As they bundled up in warm clothes and boots, Catherine felt a familiar tightness in her chest begin to ease. When was the last time they had done something this spontaneous? When was the last time they had made a family decision based purely on what sounded fun, rather than what was scheduled or expected? The hills behind Anmer Hall proved perfect for sledding, offering long, gentle slopes that were thrilling enough for excitement but safe enough for parents' peace of mind. They spent the entire afternoon racing down the hills, building elaborate snow forts, and engaging in snowball fights that left them all breathless with laughter. Catherine found herself marveling at her family in action. William was completely in his element, his competitive nature emerging as he challenged the children to see who could build the most impressive snow fort. His laughter rang out across the hillside, the sound pure and joyful in a way that she rarely heard anymore. George had abandoned all pretense of teenage coolness, throwing himself into the snowball fight with the same enthusiasm he had shown as a small child. He worked with Charlotte to build an impressive fortification, their heads bent together in serious strategic discussion that reminded Catherine of how close the siblings were when they were allowed to simply be children together. Louis was in his element, his boundless energy perfectly suited to the outdoor adventure. He appointed himself the commanding general of their snow fort, issuing orders with the absolute authority that only a 5-year-old could muster, and somehow managing to convince everyone to follow his increasingly elaborate battle plans. As the afternoon light began to fade and they finally trudged back toward the house, tired and cold but exhilarated, Catherine realized that they had just created another memory that would become part of their family's private treasure trove. This was the kind of spontaneous joy that couldn't be scheduled or choreographed, The kind of authentic family experience that was becoming increasingly rare in their carefully managed public life. That evening, as they gathered around the fireplace to dry their wet clothes and warm up with hot chocolate, Charlotte made an announcement that caught Catherine completely off guard. "I want to paint a picture of our family," she said with the serious tone she used for important decisions. "Not a formal portrait like the ones that hang in the palace, but a real picture of us being ourselves. Like we were today, in the snow, being silly and happy." The suggestion sparked an immediate and enthusiastic discussion. Louis wanted to be painted with his knights, George thought it would be cool to be shown playing guitar, and William suggested they could all be depicted building their musical snowman from Christmas Day. "But what would be the point?" George asked suddenly, his teenage practicality asserting itself. "I mean, it's not like we could hang it anywhere public. It's not an official portrait." The question hung in the air for a moment, touching on the fundamental tension between their public and private lives. In their official capacity, every image was carefully considered, every artistic representation scrutinized for its message and appropriateness. "That's exactly the point," Catherine said softly. "It would be ours. Just for us. A picture of who we really are when no one is watching." William nodded enthusiastically. "We could hang it here, at Anmer Hall. A reminder of what we discovered this week, of who we are underneath all the protocol and formality." As they continued to discuss Charlotte's painting project, Catherine found herself thinking about the larger implications of what they were creating this week. They were building a visual and emotional record of their authentic family life, a collection of memories and traditions that belonged entirely to them. Later that evening, after the children had finally been persuaded to go to bed despite their protests that they weren't tired, Catherine and William found themselves alone together in the sitting room. The fire crackled warmly in the grate, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and the house settled around them with the comfortable creaks and sighs of a home that was truly lived in. "I don't want this to end," Catherine said quietly, voicing the fear that had been growing in her heart all day. "It doesn't have to end," William replied, though she could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Not completely. We can find ways to preserve this, to maintain what we've discovered here." "How?" Catherine asked, not challenging him but genuinely seeking answers. "How do we hold on to this authenticity when we go back to a life where every moment is planned, every appearance calculated for its public impact?" William was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire as he considered her question. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful and determined. "We make it a priority," he said simply. "We protect this, the same way we would protect anything else that was precious to us. We schedule private time the same way we schedule public appearances. We create boundaries between who we are and what we do." Catherine felt a surge of hope at his words. It sounded simple when he said it, but she knew the reality would be more complex. The demands of their public roles were relentless, the expectations enormous. But, perhaps, with conscious effort and mutual determination, they could find a way to preserve what they had rediscovered at Anmer Hall. "I love you," she said suddenly, the words carrying weight beyond their simple meaning. She loved him not just as her husband, but as the partner who understood the importance of what they were fighting to preserve. "I love you too," he replied, pulling her closer on the sofa. "And I love them, and I love this. I love who we are when we're just ourselves." As they sat together in the firelight, surrounded by the evidence of their children's happiness and their own rediscovered joy, Catherine felt a deep sense of resolution forming in her heart. They would find a way to keep this, to protect and nurture the authentic family life they had discovered during their private Christmas. The snow continued to fall outside, but inside Anmer Hall, something precious and lasting was taking root. They were learning to be themselves again, and that knowledge would change everything about how they approached their future together. The final morning of their private Christmas retreat dawned clear and bright, the snow sparkling like diamonds under a brilliant blue sky. Catherine woke with a bittersweet feeling in her chest, knowing that their magical week was drawing to a close but grateful beyond words for what they had discovered together as a family. She found William already awake beside her, his gaze fixed on the ceiling as he processed thoughts that seemed to mirror her own complex emotions. Tomorrow they would return to London, back to the carefully orchestrated world of royal duties and public appearances. But they would not be returning unchanged. "Are you ready?" he asked softly, though they both knew the question carried deeper meaning than simply their readiness to pack and leave Anmer Hall. Catherine considered the question seriously. Was she ready to take what they had learned about themselves back into their public life? Was she prepared to fight for the preservation of the authentic family relationships they had rediscovered? Was she strong enough to maintain the boundaries they would need to protect their children's right to a genuine childhood? "I think so," she replied honestly. "I think we're all different now than we were when we arrived. Stronger, somehow. More certain about what really matters." Their last breakfast together was both celebratory and contemplative. The children seemed to understand instinctively that something significant was ending, but also that something important was beginning. Louis was unusually quiet as he ate his pancakes, occasionally looking around the table with an expression that suggested he was trying to memorize every detail of the moment. Charlotte had woken early to work on her family portrait, and she proudly displayed her progress to everyone over breakfast. The painting captured something beautiful and true about their time together, not a formal, posed representation, but a joyful scene of a family building a snowman together, their faces bright with laughter and love. "It's not finished yet," Charlotte explained seriously. "I want to add more details, make sure I get everyone's expressions exactly right. This is going to be our picture, the one that shows who we really are." George studied the painting with the critical eye he usually reserved for his favorite guitar solos. "It's actually really good, Charlotte. You can see that we're happy, not just pretending to be happy for cameras." His observation struck Catherine as particularly insightful. At 14, George was old enough to understand the difference between their public persona and their private reality, and sophisticated enough to recognize that Charlotte's painting captured something that formal royal portraits never could. After breakfast, they took one final walk around the grounds of Anmer Hall, each family member seeming to want to say a personal goodbye to the place that had given them back to themselves. Catherine watched as Louis insisted on visiting their musical snowman, now slightly lopsided but still sporting George's guitar with dignified presence. "Will he be okay here by himself?" Louis asked with genuine concern, his small hand patting the snowman's snowy shoulder. "Snowmen are very independent," William assured him with complete seriousness. "He'll spend the winter practicing his music and will probably be ready to give concerts when we come back." The idea that they would return, that this wouldn't be a single magical week but rather the beginning of a new tradition, seemed to comfort Louis considerably. Catherine realized that this expectation of return visits was crucial for all of them, a promise that what they had found here wouldn't be lost when they left. As they began the process of packing their belongings, Catherine found herself reluctant to fold away the clothes that had become part of their private Christmas memories. The sweater she had worn during their snowball fight, the dress Charlotte had chosen for their fancy Christmas dinner, Louis's favorite pajamas that he had insisted on wearing for 2 days straight, each item seemed to carry a piece of the magic they had created together. But, perhaps more significantly, she realized that what they were taking with them was far more valuable than what they were leaving behind. They were taking a renewed understanding of who they were as a family, a strengthened bond that had been tested and proven resilient, and a clear vision of the kind of parents and partners they wanted to be. George surprised everyone by requesting a final family meeting in the sitting room before they departed. At 14, he rarely initiated family discussions, preferring to observe rather than participate in group decision-making. But his expression was serious and determined as he asked everyone to gather around. "I want to talk about what happens next," he said with the gravity that characterized his approach to important matters. "I mean, this week has been amazing, but I don't want us to just go back to the way things were before and pretend like none of this happened." Catherine felt her heart swell with pride at her eldest son's maturity and insight. He had clearly been thinking deeply about their experience and its implications for their future family life. "What do you think we should do?" William asked, treating George's concerns with the respect they deserved. George looked around at his family, his gaze thoughtful and determined. I think we need to make some promises to each other. About protecting what we found here, about making sure we don't lose ourselves again in all the royal stuff. Charlotte nodded enthusiastically, her artistic nature drawn to the ceremonial aspect of making formal promises. Like a family pact. We could even write it down and sign it. Louis, not to be outdone by his older siblings, jumped up with excitement. And we could have a secret handshake. All the best families have secret handshakes. As they spent the next hour crafting their family pact, Catherine found herself marveling at her children's wisdom and insight. They understood, perhaps better than she and William had initially realized, the importance of what they had discovered during their private Christmas celebration. Their pact, written in Charlotte's careful handwriting and signed by all 5 family members, included promises that were both practical and profound. They committed to protecting regular family time that would be free from royal obligations, to maintaining the traditions they had created at Anmer Hall, to supporting each other's authentic selves even when public duty required formal behavior, and to returning to their Norfolk sanctuary whenever the pressures of public life threatened to overwhelm their family bonds. But the most important promise was also the simplest, to remember that their love for each other existed independent of their public roles, and to never let protocol or duty supersede their commitment to being a real, authentic family. As the afternoon progressed and their departure time approached, Catherine found herself in the garden one final time, standing in the spot where they had built their musical snowman and created so many joyful memories. The winter light was beginning to fade, casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape, but the beauty of the scene was undimmed. William joined her, slipping his arm around her waist in the gesture that had become natural and comforting over their days at Anmer Hall. They stood together in comfortable silence, both understanding that they were not just saying goodbye to a place, but marking the end of one chapter in their family's story and the beginning of another. "Do you think we can really do this?" Catherine asked quietly. "Maintain what we found here while fulfilling all our other obligations?" William was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the house where warm light glowed in the windows and their children's voices could be heard through the glass. When he spoke, his voice carried a conviction that strengthened her own resolve. "I think we have to," he said simply. "Not just for us, but for them. They deserve to know that their family is real, that our love for them isn't dependent on their royal status or their public behavior. They deserve to have parents who fight for their right to be children, who protect their ability to be authentic and genuine." Catherine nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle into her heart. Their private Christmas had given them more than just happy memories, it had given them a clear vision of the kind of family they wanted to be and the courage to fight for that vision. As they made their way back to the house for a final dinner together, Catherine realized that their time at Anmer Hall had taught them something crucial about the relationship between their public and private lives. They didn't have to choose between fulfilling their royal duties and being an authentic family. Instead, they could draw strength from their private bonds to better serve their public roles, and use their public platform to model the kind of family values they had rediscovered during their retreat. Their final evening together was marked by a gentle celebration that acknowledged both the ending of their special time and the beginning of their renewed commitment to family authenticity. Charlotte presented each family member with a small watercolor painting, miniature portraits that captured not their formal royal images but their genuine personalities as she had observed them during their week together. George played guitar while they all sang Christmas carols, their voices blending in harmonies that were imperfect but full of love. Louis entertained them with one final elaborate story about the musical snowman's adventures, complete with sound effects and dramatic gestures that had everyone laughing until their sides ached. As the evening drew to a close and the children began to show signs of the exhaustion that comes from days filled with joy and excitement, Catherine felt a deep sense of completion. They had accomplished something important during their time at Anmer Hall, something that would strengthen and sustain their family for years to come. Later that night, after the children had been tucked into their beds for the last time in their Norfolk sanctuary, Catherine and William found themselves once again in the sitting room where so many meaningful conversations had taken place over the past week. The fire burned low in the grate, casting a warm glow over the room that had become the heart of their family's rediscovery. "I want to remember everything," Catherine said softly, her gaze taking in every detail of the space that had sheltered their family's transformation. The way Louis looked when he discovered that Father Christmas had really found us here, Charlotte's concentration when she was working on her painting, George's surprise when he realized he could just be himself without worrying about royal protocol. "And the way you looked," William added, his voice warm with love and admiration. "The way you've looked all week, actually. Like yourself again, like the woman I fell in love with at university, before all the titles and expectations and public scrutiny." Catherine turned to study his face in the firelight, seeing there the same transformation she knew had occurred in herself. "You look different too. Younger, somehow. More relaxed. More like the William who used to make me laugh until I cried, who could be serious about important things but silly about everything else." They sat together in the quiet of their last evening, each lost in their own reflections about what they had gained and what they would carry forward into their return to public life. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the world outside pristine and still, as if nature itself was honoring the significance of what had transpired within the walls of Anmer Hall. As they finally prepared to go upstairs for their last night in their private sanctuary, Catherine realized that she was no longer the same person who had arrived at Anmer Hall a week earlier. She had rediscovered parts of herself that had been buried under years of royal protocol and public expectation, and, more importantly, she had learned how to protect and nurture those authentic aspects of her personality. She was still the Duchess of Cambridge, still committed to her royal duties and public service, but she was also Catherine again. She was a mother who would fight fiercely to preserve her children's right to authentic childhoods, a wife who would prioritize the reality of her marriage over its public image, and a woman who understood that her greatest strength came not from perfect adherence to protocol but from the genuine love and connection she shared with her family. Their private Christmas at Anmer Hall was ending, but what it had begun would continue long after they left Norfolk. They had rediscovered the foundation upon which everything else in their lives was built, and that foundation would support them through whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. As Catherine fell asleep for the last time in their private sanctuary, she carried with her the certainty that this week had changed them forever. They were returning to their public life not as people who had temporarily escaped their responsibilities, but as a family that had learned how to maintain their authentic bonds regardless of external pressures. The snow outside continued to blanket their private world in protective white, but, inside Anmer Hall, something even more lasting had taken root. They had learned to be themselves again, and that knowledge would illuminate everything that came after.